الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. Continuing our lessons on Durr al-Nadid of Alamat al-Shawkani rahimahullah. We'll read now today the last two chapters in which the Imam rahimahullah discusses Surah Fatiha and how Surah Fatiha indicates Tawheed, and then he answers one more major doubt or question about visitation of the graves. So he begins by saying rahimahullah, فانظر فاتحة الكتاب التي تكرر في كل صلاة مرات من كل فرد من أفراد ويفتتح بها التالي بكتاب الله والمتعلم له فإن فيها إرشاد إلى إخلاص التوحيد في مواضع. So he says, look at the book, the opening verse or surah of the book, Fatiha al-Kitab is the Fatiha, and is referred to as Fatiha because it begins the Quran. It has other names, of course, al-Quran, the mother of the book or mother of the Quran, and other names. He says this surah, which a person begins their prayer with, every individual who prays, they begin their salah after the takbir, they begin with the Fatiha. And this is something which everybody is taught. And in there is the evidence of making Tawheed sincerely for Allah in the following places. So remember, the kitab is called Durr al-Nadid. So, في كلمة إخلاص التوحيد. So here, إخلاص التوحيد, singling out Allah with Tawheed, sincerely for Him, this is the entire point of the book. So now that he answered all the doubts, he's going to push this point that Tawheed can be found in the Quran, specifically Fatiha. And the people who have mistakes in their understanding of Tawheed, or those who fell into the major sin of grave worshipping, and they fall into shirk, then they need to revise this as well. So he begins, the first point, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, in the name of Allah, the most compassionate, most merciful. فإن العلماء المعاني والبيان ذكروا أنه يقدر المتعلق متأخرا ليفيد الاختصاص البداية باسم تعالى لا باسم غيره. So in the first part, the Basmala, when we say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, the scholars of Arabic language and eloquence, they say that there is a benefit there. And it's really to do with the construction. Bismillah, in the name of Allah, right? The most merciful, the most compassionate, I do what I'm doing. In terms of praying, or you say Bismillah when you're beginning an action. The scholars, of course, they discussed and they debated. Obviously, it's not time to get into it. Is it a Jumla Ismiya or is it a Jumla Fi'liya? But inshallah, most of us either we were familiar with that or we covered it before. But the benefit is, in any case, there is a type of missing or kind of delay in the annexation or the word which you are trying to highlight, the action which you're beginning with. And what is the entire point of it? To highlight that only in Allah's name do I begin my action. This is the whole point. So whether you interpret the Basmala as a Jumla, a sentence which is nominal, or a sentence which is verbal, in either case, there is ikhtisas, there's a type of specification of what? That I'm only beginning with Allah's name. And we said that bas for isti'ana, seeking Allah's assistance. وَفِي هَذَا لَا يَخْفَى مِنْ إِخْلَاصِ التَّوْحِيد. And that is clear evidence of the sincerity of making Tawheed for Allah. And that's the beauty of Islam. When we start Bismillah, when we start our activities, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, when we start certain ibadat, this is showing us what? Everyday reminder about the Tawheed. وَمِنْهَا, second, في قوله الحمد لله رب العالمين فإن تعريف يفيد أن الحمد مقصور على الله واللام في الله تفيد اختصاص الحمد به. So he says now the second instance, the first ayah, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, and the side benefit Sheikh Iryani puts in the comments that the scholars, they differed whether or not the Basmala is an ayah or not, and this is وَالرَّاجِحْ خِلَافُهُ, the most stronger opinion is the opposite, that it's not an ayah from Surah Fatiha, it's an ayah in Surah Naml, right? And then the scholars, they discuss by this issue, but he just mentions that as a side benefit. But going with Shawkani's view, that he starts with the Basmala, that's why he began with it. As for the second one, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, then here we have fi ta'rif, alhamdu. And it's specifically for Allah, showing that the hamd, praise, all praise belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exclusively. ومقتضى هذا, and this indicates أنه لا حمد لغيره أصلا, that there is no praise for other than Allah in origin. وما وقع منه لغيره فهو في حكم العدم, and what occurs in them, a praise, really has no, it's a ruling of absence. And this is because الحمد هو الثناء باللسان على جميل اختياري لقصد التعظيم. Because when you say alhamdu, all praise, you're really praising on your tongue this person for their beauty that they have from voluntary actions and voluntary things in order to venerate them. فلا ثناء إلا عليه ولا جميل إلا منه ولا تعظيم إلا له. And in reality, there's no praise except for Allah, and there's no beauty except from Allah, and there's no veneration except for Him. So it's a beautiful way of explaining the Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Alhamdu alif lam him lil istighraq. The ulama say all hamd, jami' al-mahamid, all hamd belongs to Allah. Which then raises the question, can you say alhamd for the creation? And the ulama, they say, if you mean that you're saying that the creation or a person has some praiseworthy actions, then yes. Not all praise, some praise. Because there's hamd, there's madh, and there's thana, and there's shukr. There's these different words. But hamd specifically. For example, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam's name is Muhammad, the one who deserves praise. Is that shirk? It's not. Because the ulama say all hamd belongs to Allah, all praise. And if human beings have something praiseworthy, they don't have all praise. And their praise comes from Allah, whereas His praise is the origin of all praise. So really, this is where he's saying that the asl, or all praise goes back to Allah. Whether you're praising them, anybody, it's because it goes back to Allah. So the wording, he says then, there's no praise, no thana illa alayhi, no true praise except for Him, wala jamila illa minhu, and there's nothing beautiful except that came from Him, wala ta'zim illa lahu, and there's no real veneration except for Him. So hamd, Shaykh Faisal in the comments, he mentioned that hamd here, the Shaykh said, al-jamil al-jamil ikhtiyari. And what is meant by this, Shaykh Faisal says that you praise someone for the beauty that they have that comes from the voluntary actions. أما الجميل الخلقي, as the beauty that they have in terms of their creation, فهذا لا يحمد عليه. This one you don't praise them with hamd, rather yumhad. They're given another kind of praise, a lower level. Right? So madah is for that. So if somebody is beautiful physically, we don't say hamd, we don't praise them with the word hamd. You praise them with the word madah. And that's just in terms of the linguistics. But the whole benefit of this, alhamdu, all praises specifically, and all of them entirely belong to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this showing us what? That this is ikhlas al-tawheed, because you only praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala this way. And this is what the surah is beginning with. And that's again the second benefit it's trying to highlight. The third one, قوله مالك يوم الدين, or Maliki Yawmiddin. Right? The different qira'ah, you can say Maliki Yawmiddin, the Master Day of Judgment, or the King of the Day of Judgment or Day of Recompense. And with these different recitations, Malik or Malik, he says, what does it indicate? يفيد أنه لا ملك لغيره فلا ينفض إلا تصرفه ولا تصرف أحد من خلقه من غير فرق بين النبي والمرسل ولا ملك مقرب وعبد صالح. That this wording, this ayah, this verse tells us Maliki Yawmiddin, Allah is the Master of the Judgment and the King of it. Because Malik and Malik have two meanings that are connected. You could be a master of something, and you could be a king of something. Allah is both of the Day of Recompense. But what does it tell us? All dominion belongs to Him, and nobody else has the dominion and kingship and power purely except for Him. Hence, if we are kings and human beings, or we are owners, we only own things by the virtue of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowing us to have it. And we know that because, and I believe Brother Majid was speaking on this before, our dominion and ownership is limited. We cannot do with our wealth whatever we wish, only that which Allah has decreed for us. Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fa'alu lima yurid. He does whatever He wills. So Allah is the real Malik and Malik, the king and the owner. And this goes back to His Tawheed al-Rububiyyah we talked about. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the dominion of the entire universe. And what is intended then? فَلَا يَنْفُضُ. There is no execution of the affairs in the dominion إِلَّا تَصَرُّفُهُ, except by His conduct or His permission or His allowance. And this doesn't, he says there's no distinguishment here whether a person be a prophet who's been sent or an angel who is near or a righteous servant. It means nobody has true full ownership or dominion of any property or any kingship except for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he continues saying the same thing applies to the word Malik, kingship. So Malik, that's what it indicates, and Malik also. But Malik has something additional. فَإِنَّهُ يُفِيدُ أَنَّ الْأَمْرَ أَمْرُهُ, that all commandments are really His. وَالْحُكْمَ حُكْمُهُ, and the ruling belongs to Him only. لَيْسَ لِغَيْرِهِ مَعَهُ أَمْرٌ وَلَا حُكْمٌ, and no one has the affair of judgment and ruling except for him subhanahu wa ta'ala. كما أنه ليس لغير ملوك الأرض معهم أمر ولا حكم. Just like no other king in the earth, right? Because Allah is the creator, all creation, whoever may be a king, they have no real rulership and no real commands except for Allah. But he says in the example of the dunya, if there's a king of a city or a country, the king has the, you could say, upper hand of the rules, that dominion. وَلِلَّهِ مَثْلُ الْأَعْلَى. Allah has the greatest example. Allah is the greatest all kings. Therefore His judgment, His ruling is the greatest. And we said this before, that Alamat Turtush al-Maliki rahimahullah used the example of kingship as the example of Tawheed al-Rubiyyah. Simple example. Just like in a country there's only one king, he has the final say and control of everything. Allah is the only king of the whole universe. Right? Just so in our society, one CEO, one husband, but when someone comes to say two gods, makes no sense. Right? Why is everything in the world work this way, then the universe? And the reason this is important is because we can see then that direction is going. But what is Malik and Malik connected here? One is to do with ownership and one has to do with the rulership. Right? So Allah's judgments and His decisions, another one has to do with His ownership and also what happens therein. All of this is pointing to what? قد فسر الله هذا المعنى الإضافي المذكور في فاتحة الكتاب. Allah explained this meaning of يوم الدين in another part of the Quran where He says وما أدراك ما يوم الدين يثم ما أدراك ما يوم الدين يوم لا تملك نفس لنفس شيئا والأمر يومئذ لله. Allah says, and what is it that the day of recompense? I want to make you know what is the day of recompense. That is a day no soul has the capacity to benefit or avail another soul in any affair that day except by Allah. And so that's the explanation of Yawm al-Din. طيب, then he continues and he says وما كان يفهم كلام العرب ونكتة. Whoever understands the Arab's language and the secrets of their speech will see in this verse the clarity of that. And what is indicating here is that in the verse there is evidence of generality. So then Shaykh Riyani, he puts in the footnotes, Alamat Sa'di rahimahullah in his Qawa'id al-Hisan لتفسير القرآن, he says قاعدة الرابعة, the fourth principle, إذا وقعت نكرة في سياق النفي أو نهي أو شرط أو استفهام دلت على العموم. That anytime we have in the Quran an indefinite word in the context of denial or prohibition or condition or questioning, it indicates generality. And he gives the example يوم لا تملك نفس لنفس شيئا. So this word shay'a is indefinite in this context, indicating all creation, all people, all creation, that they have nothing in terms of judgment or rule or ability except by Allah's permission. So this indicating pure, that's why Allah is Maliki Yawmiddin, or Maliki Yawmiddin, both of them. So that's a side benefit if you go back to that book. The fourth one now, go to the verse, Iyaka na'budu. Only you, O Allah, we worship. Here he says that you have the proceeding of Iyaka, mind the object over the na'budu. And what is this point here indicating? Why do we have Iyaka coming over before the word we worship? You we worship, only worship. Indicating لا يشاركه فيها غيره ولا يستحقها سواه. That no one deserves worship except for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, and no one is participating or sharing in that. So it indicating ikhtisas, hasr, restriction and specification. And he says, from here we learn, عرفت, that al-istighatha, seeking that help in the time of distress, والدعاء, and seeking dua, والتعظيم, and veneration, والذبح, and slaughter, والتقرب, and drawing near to Allah, من أنواع العبادة. It's all types of ibadah. So when we ask the great worshipper, then why are you giving these ibadat to other than Allah when you say 17 times a day, إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ? It's a question then they can't really answer, except that they're going to have to argue that these actions we're doing are not ibadat, or we're not doing as an ibadah, or we're doing one that's in a form that's permissible. For example, istighatha, and like this. So it's an important reminder that the Fatiha itself is the greatest, the most important reminder of the Tawheed that we need to continue to teach to people. وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ. Here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and to you only we seek assistance, indicating what? Specification. And Shaykh Alamat al-Shawkani says, وَيَقْتَضِي أَنَّهُ لَا يُشَارِكُهُ غَيْرُهُ فِي اسْتِعَانَ بِهِ فِي الْأُمُورِ الَّتِي لَا يَقْدِرُ عَلَيْهِ غَيْرُهُ. That we don't ask assistance from the creation in that which only Allah is able to help us with. So just see the beautiful connection there, because some people they get confused. We said isti'ana as types, that which for the creation, that which for Allah. So this one, إِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينَ, in that which only Allah is able to do, we seek Allah's assistance. But we still seek Allah's assistance, even that which we are able to do, because that's how the origin should be. The way of the Sahaba and Salaf, you always seek Allah's assistance. But when is it haram? When is it shirk? When you seek the assistance of the creation, and that which is specific to Allah. So now he says, فَهَذِهِ خَمْسَةُ مَوَاضِعَ. These are 5 places in Surah Fatiha. يُفِيدُ كُلُّ واحد منها إخلاص التوحيد. All of it shows the singularity and singling out Allah in Tawheed. مع أن الفاتحة الكتاب ليست إلا 7 آيات. Except that Fatiha is only 7 verses. فما ظنك? What do you think then? بما في سائر الكتاب العزيز. What do you think about the whole Quran then? If these 7 verses show us the purity of Tawheed should be given to Allah, then what do you think about the whole Quran? And he puts Shaykh Diyani in the footnotes. Shaykh Sa'di says in Qawaid al-Hisan, Al-Quran kulluhu لتقرير Tawheed. The whole Quran is there to specify and to confirm and affirm the Tawheed, ونفي ضده, and to negate the opposite. وأكثر آيات يقرر الله فيها توحيد الألوهية, because most of the Quran Allah confirms the Tawheed of Allah's worship, وَلِإِخْلَاصُ الْعِبَادَةِ لِلَّهِ وَحْدَهُ, and to give their worship sincerely for Him alone, لا شريك له, without any partners. And this was said before by Imam Ibn Qayyim and also Imam Qurtubi. They both said the same thing. The whole Quran indicates Tawheed. Imam Ibn Qayyim said that, and before Imam Qurtubi, and here Sa'di, they all said this. The whole Quran is Tawheed. And the beauty of this is that if somebody knows this, then it becomes very important to understand that when people are not understanding the Quran properly or studying it, then this is another reason why the shirk may spread. Because when we become ignorant of the Quran, the Sunnah, and the intended meanings, then we're going to be opposing them without knowing. And that's why it's very important to go back to the basics, teach people Fatiha. Tafsir Surah Fatiha is such an important tafsir. And very important that we add to this, that Shaykh now says, the 6th point, if there's a 6th one, we go to the word Rabbul Alameen, or Rabbil Alameen, sorry, this part of the verse, in the 2nd verse, it's also another addition, because you see, when we say Rabbil Alameen, means we only have one Rabb, لغة وشرعا, in both linguistically and technically, and العالم ما سوى الله سبحانه. That Alameen is everything besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Therefore, there's only one Rabb, one Lord for the creation. And therefore, by necessity, one who you direct your worship to, fil uluhiyyah. That's another benefit. It's the 6th one. And he mentions, to finish this chapter, that if you go back to the Kutub al-Ma'ani wal-Bayan, wa Tafsir al-Usul, books of Arabic eloquence, and Tafsir and Usul, you'll find that there's 13 different ways to specify, or forms to specify, to make specification in Arabic language. And he says that if you go to some of these books, you see additional ways I didn't mention. And this will also then show us a benefit that when we find those, especially in the concept of Tawheed, what is it showing? Why is so much specification in the ayat of Tawheed? Al-Ikhlas al-Tawheed wa ibtal al-Shirk bi jami'i aqsamihi. In order to show this purity of Tawheed and to negate and nullify shirk in all of its categories. All of its categories. And this is important. If you read some of the tafsir, you'll find when you go to the ayat, there's different ways to specify language. Why in Surah Fatiha or in fact in this ayat about Tawheed, you have so much specifications. Siyagh, language or tools, a specification. Why? To show to Tawheed. An example will be Surah Zumar. If you go into the first couple of verses, when the Quraysh claim that they don't worship them, in there we can see another example of specification about Tawheed, showing what? Tawheed only belongs to Allah, Ibadah belongs to Allah, and you're doing shirk. So that's a good exercise as well. When you read the Quran, take a look at those places where you find specification, ask why? Why so much specification? To show Ikhlas al-Tawheed, Tawheed specifically for Allah, and to nullify jami'i aqsamihi of shirk, all shirk. And this is an important benefit, because when we're reading the Quran too, we must read the Quran with its intended meaning. Because sometimes what happens is, if you have a cursory or a surface level reading of the Quran, you're going to be skipping these hidden layers. And maybe another time we'll mention an example. Now he says, آخر مسألة, the last مسألة before we finish the book. وَعْلَمْ, he says, أن السائل كثر الله فوائده ذكر في جملة ما سأل عنه. Now he goes back to the questioner. He says, the questioner who asked me the initial question, Imam Shawkani is saying, may Allah increase him in benefit and good. He mentioned in the last part of the question the following. أنه لو قصد الإنسان قبر رجل مسلمين مشهور بصلاح ووقف لديه وأدى للزيارة وسأل الله بأسمائه الحسنى بما لهذه الميت من منزلة، هل تكون هذه بدعة عبادة لهذه الميت ويصدق عليه أنه قد دعا غير الله. The question is asking, if a person intends to go to a grave of a righteous person from the Muslimin, standing at his grave to do a ziyarah, visitation of the graves, asking Allah by His beautiful names, and by the station of that person who has passed away. And using Allah's beautiful names and making dua by way of the manzila, the station of that righteous person. Is this innovation in worship, or is it considered worshipping other than Allah, making dua to other than Allah? And so this is what he's trying to ask. And then he gives the example, right, as well. وَأَنَّهُ قَدْ عَبَدَ غَيْرِ الرَّحْمَنِ وَصُلِبَ مِنْهُ اسْمِ الْإِيمَانِ. So what is the concluding things that come from that in terms of the rulings? Is it kufr? Is it ridda? Is the person lost iman? Etc. So he says, وَأَقُول. Now Shawkani is going to answer. قد قدمنا في أوائل هذا الجواب. We already answered in the beginning of this answer. أنه لا بأس بالتوصل بالنبي بالأنبياء أو ولي بالأولياء أو عالم العلماء أو وضحنا ذلك بما لا مزيد عليه. We already clarified the ruling about tawassul to the prophets or the walis or the scholars, etc. And we already said, and to Imam Shaykh Alamat Faisal says ta'ala, that this is the mistake from Shawkani, that he permitted making dua through the station and the essence of a pious person. So we already clarified that. That's the mistake he made. So you have to remember, dua, tawassul, the tawassul be manzila, the station, or the that, the essence. So jah, status, and that of an individual is bid'ah. That's the correct view. But he said it's permissible. So he just confirmed what he said, and we're just going to confirm that this was a mistake. He says, فَهَذَا الَّذِي جَاءَ إِلَى قَبْرِ الزَّائِرِ. Now he says, if someone went to the grave when visiting, وَدَعَ اللَّهِ, he makes dua to Allah وحده. وتوسل بذلك الميت كأن يقول اللهم إني أسألك. Oh Allah, by example, the Imam goes there and asks, making tawassul, oh Allah, I ask you أن تشفيني من كذا وأتوسل إليك بما لهذا عبد الصالح من عبادة لك أو مجاهدة فيك أو تعلم وتعليم خالصا لك. He says, if I went to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the person said, oh Allah, I ask you to cure me from sickness, making tawassul to you by way of the righteous servant of yours who's due to his worship or his striving your path or teaching knowledge, khalisatan laka, that is only for you. And he says this, Shawkani said this is permissible. Again, this is his view, and we said that it's not permissible. But is it bid'ah or is this shirk? What is it? What's the ruling on that? Bid'ah, because you're directing the dua to Allah, so therefore it's not in the category of shirk, but in the manner you're doing it is innovated, hence it's bid'ah. So remember, tawassul is three types: one that's legislated, one that is shirki, one is bid'ah, innovated. One is polytheistic, one is innovated, one is legislated. So because the dua is going to Allah, no longer is in the category of shirk. But the question we're going to ask, is that the way you ask? Is it reported? No. So therefore it becomes bid'ah, not sunnah or legislated. He says, now, لكن بأي معنى قام بيمشي القبر. Now the Shawkani is going to answer the real question. Why did a person go to the grave to begin with? What does it mean behind that? And this is the question, investigation. Why would somebody go to the grave? Make a dua to Allah. مخلصين له الدين. Right? It's a good question. Why did you go all the way there? And it's important because when you think about ziyarah, when you're visiting the graves, there's an intent, and there's adab, and then there's a etiquette and things to do. But the person here is making dua to Allah at the grave of that person. So he says, وإن كان لمخلص الزيارة عفوا لمحض الزيارة, the person is only doing pure visitation, ولم يعزم على الدعاء والتوصل إلا بعد تجريد القصد إلى الزيارة فهذا ليس بممنوع فإنه إنما جاء ليزور. He says if a person is doing really, if he's intending pure visitation, in that he's intending, and he didn't intend to make dua or to seek tawassul إلا بعد تجريد قصد الزيارة, except after getting that visitation, then it's not prohibited. And what he's trying to say is if a person went there to do ziyarah, that's an ibadah, then after he started another ibadah which is dua. Okay, so he's differentiating here. And this is what Shaykh Islam Taymiyyah talks about as well. In Majmu' Fatawa, Shaykh Iryani puts in the comments about the visitation of the grave. I mean, Shaykh Islam Taymiyyah has a long answer on this as well. But the point is, someone going to the grave and the dua عند القبور لو كان أفضل من دعاء عند غيرها وهو أحب إلى الله وأوجب. If someone believes this, then this is where the problem comes. If someone believes they're making dua the grave special and unique. But here Shawkani is saying if someone is going for ziyarah, that's one ibadah. You're going to visit the graves to do an ibadah by visitation, reminding yourself of the akhirah, making dua for the mayyit, etc. And then after that, the intention came, you're going to make dua while I'm there to Allah. He said, that's okay. قد أذن لنا رسول صلى الله عليه وسلم بزيارة القبور. The Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم allowed us to visit graves. كنتم نهيتكم عن زيارة القبور ألا فزوروها. I used to prohibit you from visiting graves. Verily, you should visit them. In the hadith is sahih. So he's saying here two different actions. Now he says, he brings another hadith as well. He says, وَخَرَجَ النَّبِي صلى الله عليه وسلم زِيَارَةِ الْمَوْتَى. The Nabi also went to visit the graves. And the hadith about Aisha, I believe he mentioned, he cited earlier. So he's reminding us the evidences for it. Then he says, فَلَمْ يَفْعَلْ هَذَا الزَّائِرُ إِلَّا مَا هُوَ مَأْذُورٌ لَهُ بِهِ وَمَشْرُوعٌ. Someone did this, he's done what's legislated and permitted. لكن بشرط, with the condition. However, with the condition, أَلَّا يُشَدَّ الرَّحْلَةَ رحله ولا يعزم على السفر ولا يرحل كما ورد تقييد الإذن بزيارة القبور بحيث لا تشد الرحال إلى ثلاثة. With the condition that someone does not travel to do this because it's not permitted, it's been reported the prohibition of visitation, traveling for the sake of visiting graves or visiting anything except the three masjids. Okay, so هو مقيد لمطلق الزيارة. So here is taking the point that as long as you're not going to travel for it, because you can't travel except the three masjids. وقد خصص بالمخصصات منها زيارة قبر الشريف النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم المحمدي على صاحبه أفضل الصلاة والتسليم وبذلك خلاف بين العلماء. And he says now there is a discussion about specifications. This hadith, you can't travel except the three masjids, has been specified with certain specifications. One of them was discussion about visiting the grave of the Prophet ﷺ, intending to visit his grave solely. And there's a khilaf, he says, between the ulama, difference of opinion amongst scholars. وهي مسألة من المسائل التي طالت ذيولها. His discussions become very, very, very long and prolonged. واشتهرت أصولها وامتحن بسببها من امتحن وليس الذكر لك ها هنا بمقصودها. He said, and those discussions have become widespread and discussions have been evidences therefrom, and those have been tested by it or that tested due to it. Means like Shaykh Simon Taymiyyah. This is one of the reasons why he ended up in jail, for not permitting people to visit solely the grave of Rasulullah, but you visit the Masjid Nabawi and then taba'an with the secondary. And so therefore the question that comes in this hadith, is it permitted? In the hadith it shows it's not. And here's the fatwa Shaykh Al-Bani Fatawa Al-Imarat. He says as we're traveling to the graves, with the travel which is specified for the sake of visiting the grave of Rasulullah, let alone traveling to visit other graves than the graves of the pious or the prophets. هذا أمر لا يجوز في الإسلام. It's an affair that's not allowed in Islam because of the hadith. The Prophet ﷺ said, do not travel except for the three masajid. So therefore Shaykh Al-Bani says, whoever travels just to visit the grave of Prophet ﷺ, to do a ziyarah which is legislated, فعليه أن ينوي سفر باكتساب فضيلة الصلاة في مسجده. Solution, make your niyyah to go to his masjid to get the reward of praying in his masjid. That's your intention. It should be your intention. And then he says that's how you will do it when you go there. And this is the intent behind it, because the hadith says you can travel to the masjid for this purpose, to travel to these masajid for the purpose of visiting them. And he says then naturally when you get there, بطبيعة الحال, when you're there, إذا وصل إلى هناك, when you got there, وزار قبر الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم وزار البقيع وزار الشهداء أحد, هذا كله جائز لا خلاف فيه. And naturally when you're in Medina, you're going to visit the grave of Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, then Baqi' is right there, then you go to Uhud to visit the martyrs, and you're going to, because you're already in Medina. You came with the right reason, intention, so that's your initial and main goal, and a secondary goal with these. And this shows us the benefit of Sharia. When you stop the bid'ah, there's already a solution to Sharia. It's already there. It's different. For example, someone traveled, Shaykh Al-Bani, they asked him these questions before. Someone was traveling and got to the region in Egypt and he's beside Mount Sinai. You're already there for something else. You can, Bismillah, you can go see it. You didn't travel to go there, but you're not in the region. So for example, let's say someone there for some business or medication, and he's there, then khalas, he says, okay, well, while we're already here, let's go and just see this. Versus somebody who's going to go out of his house, book a flight just to go there, not allowed. And this is important because today we have this new industry, right? A lot of people make ziyarat to a lot of places. I don't know, it used to be before people go Mecca, Medina. Quds is very hard to go, so then it started becoming Spain and Morocco, and then we just kept a long list. And you wonder, what is the intention behind this? Are we making ziyarat to specific places of Islamic heritage? Or we're just going for something, siyaha, tourism. It's very important. We have to explain to people, what are we doing here? So some people see that I'm going to go ziyarah, make a ziyarah specifically of all the Islamic relics. And there's a story, one of the Sahaba, Abu Hurairah, another Sahabi, when that Sahabi went to visit, he came back from Mount Sinai. And he told him, if I knew you went there, I would have told you the hadith of Rasulullah, and he mentioned the same hadith. So he's not allowed to even go to these places which are found in the Quran. وَطُورِ سِينِينَ. So I'm saying this because we need to explain this to people between visitation for a purpose of a specific site versus visitation of an area when you're in proximity versus visitation that is right? Just to go, right, for other purposes. So we have to pay attention to this. So this is a nice benefit because that's the solution. Sheikh Ibn has mentioned your niyyah is to go to the masjid, and naturally after that you will go to the great Prophet ﷺ, because that's something that is legislated to visit. He says, وَأَمَّا إِذَا لَمْ يَقْصُدْ مُجَرَّدِ زِيَارَةٍ. As for someone who didn't intend purely visitation, من قصد المشي إلى القبر يفعل دعاء عنده فقط. Rather, if someone intended to walk to the grave to make dua there specifically, وجعل الزيارة تابعة لذلك, and he made the travel, the visitation of the grave, يعني the visitation of graves secondary, أو مشي لمجموع زيارة والدعاء, or he made the intention to combine between visitation and dua, فقد كان يغنيه أن يتوصل إلى الله بما لذلك الميت من أعمال الصالح من دون أن يمشي القبر. So Shawkani's view is that he can just do tawassul with a person's status without even going there. And we're going to say that more correct, he shouldn't make tawassul with a person's status, nor should he intend that. Let's make dua to Allah doing tawassul with mashru', by Allah's beautiful names and attributes, but the good deeds that you did. We're asking someone pious who is present and alive and capable to make dua for you. That's the solution. There's no need to go there. And then now he argues, فإن قال, if someone say, إنما مشيت إلى قبره لأشير إليه عند توصل به. I'm just going there so I can point to the grave when I'm doing tawassul. That's okay. So he says, if يقال له, say to him, إن الذي يعلم السر وأخفى, the one who knows everything hidden and apparent, ويحول بين المرء وقلبه, and it comes between someone's heart and their, between a person and his heart, ويطلع على خفيات ضمائره, he knows all the hidden affairs of your consciousness and your soul, وتنكشف لديه مكنونات السرائر, لا يحتاج منك إلى هذه إشارة التي زعمت أنها الحاملة لك على قصد القبر ومشي إليه. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who has all this capacity, knows everything, it's not needed for you to go to the grave to point him for him to know what you're doing. You see how shaitan tricks people? So I'm just going to go to point to it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alim, right? He knows what you're doing. So there's a point, because these doubts, you can see what's going on here. فما أراك مشيت لهذه الإشارة فإن الذي تدعوه في كل مكان. That which has led you to pointing to this, really you're calling to one who is with you, and his knowledge and ability and his hearing and seeing in all places. ومع كل إنسان, with every person. And rather you're walking to someone or to one who لتسمع الميت وتوسلك به وتعطف قلبه عليك وتتخذ عنده ندا بقصده وزيارته والدعاء عنده وتوسل به. So really what's happening is, فإن الذي تدعوه, what really pushes someone, right, to do this and to go there, is that connection that they have to that person who's يعني dead. تتخذ عنده ندا بقصده وزيارته والدعاء عنده وتوسل به. وأنت إن رجعت إلى نفسك وسألتها عن هذه المعنى فربما تقر لك به وتصدقك الخبر. And you'll find out the person really checks himself, will find out this is what's really happening. That person is taking that person in the grave as a partner with Allah. This is what really led him to go there. Because he believes that person is going to help him to answer his dua, or be able to get him closer to Allah, or making tawassul to him, or making dua towards him. And this is important because there's no ayah or hadith that says you go to the grave of someone to dua to be accepted. It's more specifically in other places. And he says, فَإِن وَجَدْتَ عِنْدَهَا هذا المعنى الدقيق الذي هو بقبول منك حقيقة فاعلم أنه قد علق بقلبك ما علق بقلوب عباد القبور. And if you really to investigate and look at this deep meaning, you will find that which has connected your heart to that person's grave is what connected the hearts of the grave worshippers. ولكنها قهرت هذه النفس الخبيثة عن أن ترجم بلسانك عنها. That really this is what's happening. The person who is doing this, his soul has become corrupted. وتنشر بها, and has now led him to walking towards this من محبة ذلك القبر, for the love of that grave, والاعتقاد فيه, and believing in it, والتعظيم له, and venerating it, والاستغاثة به, and seeking the help in time of distress from it. فأنت مالك لها من هذه حثيثة مملوك لها من حيث التي. So he continues now explaining this whole point. طيب, now Shawkani's last couple of points here, when he explains this, there's only a few pages left, inshallah. He says now, when he mentions this point about the person whose hearts are connected to this dead person, and he's trying to actually get closer to them, and his heart's attached to them the way the grave worshippers are, but he's telling himself that he's actually doing it towards Allah. فإن قلت, have you said to them, رجعت إلى نفسي فلم أجد عندها شيء من هذا. If a person had said, but I actually checked my heart, I don't find anything of that. It means I'm not really intending anything except trying to get closer to Allah by way of this person, by going to the grave and making tawassul to them. فما أظن الحامل لك على مشي إلى القبر إلا أنك سمعت الناس يفعلون شيئا ففعلته ويقولون شيئا فقلته. So then he says, but really what's happening is that you're doing something because you saw other people doing it, and you're saying things because other people are doing it. It means you're blind following. فاعلم أن هذه الأول عقدة من عقدة توحيدك وأول محنة من محن تقليدك. I know that this is the first bond that's going to be broken of your tawheed, and the first trial of the trial that you face of blind following. فارجع تؤجر. Go back and you'll be rewarded. And don't come closer and تنحر, يعني to slaughter or to give in to this. فإن هذا التقليد الذي حملك على هذه المشي الفارغة العاطلة الباطلة سيحملك على أخواتها فتقف على باب الشرك أولا ثم تدخل منه ثانيا ثم تسكن فيه وإليه ثالثا وأنت في ذلك كله تقول سمعت الناس يقولون شيئا فقلته ورأيتم يفعلون أمرا ففعلته. And he said you should know that go back and prevent yourself from this empty form of blind following, empty walking and false and baseless effort, for it will lead you to its sisters, means that which is coming after the actions, by first standing at the door of shirk, then secondly entering into it, then thirdly living therein, and then beyond that, right, what comes, and you will continue to say, I heard the people saying such and such, so I said it, and I saw people doing such and such, so I did it. And this is the danger and the reality of most lay people, that they blind follow because they've seen other people doing it, and they use the cover of taqleed, and we said before, or even some of them will hide behind the various opinions of different madahib or scholars as a scapegoat and say, well, I'm just following that. Knowing deep down that this is not proven, this is not correct. And this is what the benefit of Shawkani is highlighting again, that we have to stop the people, and it's going back to the principle of closing the doors. Sadd al-Daraya', closing the door to shirk, which is part of the da'wah of Tawheed. We call people to that, we close the door to shirk, and this is one of them. To the blind following other people's mistakes, to allowing people to become spacious in affairs which are not legislated. So for example, everything he's mentioning now, it revolves on prohibition and bid'ah, because the person is either going to be making dua with the status of individual or his essence, or walking to the graves, but they're doing a ziyarah bid'iyah, innovated ziyarah, or he might be doing, for example, traveling to a site without evidence, not the three masjids. So everything the person is doing is either bid'ah or prohibition, haram. Where does that take a person next? To shirk and kufr. Showing us that when the ulama always say that the innovation is a doorway and the postman of shirk, we can see how it is. You venerate the graves, you're doing ziyarah which is not mashru'ah, then you're doing haram, and next thing you're doing shirk. And it's true, most of the people today when they're doing ziyarah, this is what's happening. They're traveling far away. They may argue, is it haram, not haram? Then what's next? He's doing tawassul, bid'ah version. What's next? Then tawassul is doing istighatha towards the grave. And it started with what? A prohibition. You shouldn't have even got there. You shouldn't have been doing that. But what it ended up, he's doing shirk. And this is a beautiful benefit to remind the people that we shouldn't wait for people to do this. Rather, we have to teach them from before. The prohibitions have meanings. What are the wisdoms behind these prohibitions? These are one of the things that we can use to explain to people why it's important to stay with it. And then he finishes by trying to draw attention to the questioner. And the question who has this doubt. إِنَّكَ عَلَى بَصِيرَةٍ فِي عَمَلِكَ وَعِلْمِكَ. You are a person, if you're upon clear insight regarding your actions and statements, لَسْتَ مِمَّنْ يُنْقَادِ لِهَوَى نَفْسِهِ. Right? You will not be able to protect yourself from the following desires. كَالْأَوَّلِ وَلَا مِمَّنْ يَهَوَى. So now he's talking to the person who's a blind follower about that if you really look carefully, you can prevent yourself if you continue this way from falling into these things, and then later on developing false beliefs and corrupting the person's tawheed. And the discussion continues, right? Trying to reason with the person's intellect and the person's heart. And then he finishes by talking about the ruling, the khulasa, because he didn't answer the question except in stages. So now he says, وَقَدْ ظَهَرَ بِمَجْمُوعِ هَذَا التَّقْسِيمِ. Now we're going to say, showed all that I mentioned above, they can be divided as following. أَنَّ مَنْ يَقْصُدُ الْقَبْرِ لِيَدْعُوا عِنْدَهُ هُوَ أَحَدُ ثَلَاثَةٍ. So now he's going to summarize all the rulings that he just mentioned to make it easy. He says the person who intends to go to a grave to supplicate thereby, he falls to one of three categories. Number one, in Masha لقصد الزيارة فقط, you only walk there to do a visitation only, وعرض له دعاء, he makes supplication, ولم يحصل بدعائه تغرير على غير فذلك جائز. and he didn't do any dua that led him to make a dua to other than Allah or to lead that direction, then this is permissible. So this one, Shaykh Fawzan comments, what is this kind of ziyarah? This is the ziyarah which is permissible, right? If someone's doing this. But he says, pay attention to this. Shawkani's point, when he says dua here, he also indicates what he intends by dua here with the tawassul person's status as well, which is the point we have to keep highlighting that's wrong. That we can't do that, right? That's not correct. Because that leads to the shirk, right? So we have to always highlight when Shawkani is saying dua, he's allowing that. Second one, when مشى لقصد الدعاء فقط, if a person went to walk to the grave to intend to make dua alone, أو له مع الزيارة, along with that he has with the intention of visitation, وكان له من اعتقاد ما تقدمنا, and he also has what we preceded of beliefs, فهو على خطر الوقوع في الشرك. It is feared this person will fall into shirk, فضلا عن كونه عاصيا. That forget about, or let alone that person being sinful. So second one, someone's going there to do visitation with these beliefs that he mentioned earlier, that believing that the grave has something, right, has special status, or some of the person going to the grave has a virtue in it, and making dua to them, all these things are going to lead to shirk. And it's feared that person fall into shirk, let alone the person is sinful. And we're going to summarize the bottom, another benefit here. And the last one, وإذا لم يكن له اعتقاد في الميت, if he has no real belief in regarding the dead person, على الصفة التي ذكرنا, with the intention we mentioned earlier. Means he doesn't believe that the person you're making dua by way of them is going to get the dua answered, because again, Shawkani allows us to make dua by way of them. And these kinds of beliefs, فهو عاصٍ آثم, he's sinful. He's sinful, and he's disobedient. هذا قل أحواله, means it's the least of his affairs because he's traveling, right, for that purpose. Then the bottom, Shaykh Al-Yani summarizes the ziyarat in an easier way, because Shawkani's summary is based on the question. So ziyarat al-qubur ala thalath aqsam. Ulama say they're visiting the graves upon three actual categorizations. Number one, ziyaratun shar'iyyah, a ziyarah which is legislative. Tanfa'u za'ir, it benefits the visitor by reminding him of the hereafter, and giving him a reminder of the hereafter, and benefiting the dead by dua for them, and istighfar, a secret forgiveness for them, without traveling and without saying any false statement. So that's a beautiful description. That's a ziyarah shar'iyyah. Number one, it benefits the visitor by allowing them to be reminded of the akhirah. Number one. That's why we go to benefit ourselves. And number two, to benefit the dead person by making dua for them, and they're seeking their forgiveness. Seeking forgiveness for them. Then there's two things you have to avoid: traveling for the purpose of visiting the graves, and saying qawl batin, any kind of speech not pleasing to Allah, like wailing or other things like this. Number two, ziyaratun bid'iyyah, an innovated visitation. وهي كل زيارة فيها مخالفة للهدي النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. هدي النبوي, right? Any ziyarah, visitation that opposes the prophetic way and guidance. From that, tawassul بأهلها, making tawassul to the status of the essence of individuals. والصلاة والدعاء عندها, and making salah and making dua next to the grave. So why is it called bid'i and not shirki? You're making dua, you salah for Allah at the grave. It's bid'ah. There's no special ground. You're not supposed to pray there, right? But that's the whole point. It's not there's a place prohibited to pray, right? The hammam and maqbara. Imagine someone going there, believe it's special. So this is going to lead then to that we said leader of shirk. So that's called ziyarah bid'iyya, because it opposes the prophetic way and involves bid'ah. The third one, ziyaratun shirkiyya, the polytheistic visitation. وهي كل زيارة فيها شرك بالله, any visitation in which includes polytheistic or polytheism, يعني shirk with Allah, associating partners with Allah, كالدعاء غير الله, like making dua to Allah, أو ذبح, or making a slaughter to Allah, أو نظري لأصحاب القبور, or making a vow, a nadhr to the people inside the graves, أو الاستغاثة بهم, or making istighatha to them. And that's a summary of everything that Shawkani is trying to say. And then he finishes by, right, making dua. This is a summary of his answer, and it's written in the year 12, Rajab. Shahr Rajab, Sana, it's the month of Rajab in the year 1213 Hijri. Hamidan lillah, wa musalliyan wa musallima ala rasulihi wa alihi. So inshallah ta'ala, that's a summary or the finishing of this book. Inshallah ta'ala, next week, with ta'ala, what we'll do, we'll summarize the main topics that are mentioned in the book, because there's a lot of benefits in this book. And many of it is also summary and review what we already covered before. And we'll also address, inshallah ta'ala, some of the most common contemporary doubts regarding Tawheed and Ibadah in today's time. And some of those serious major doubts that we hear about, da'wah of Shaykh Islam Muhammad Wahab and the ulama and Najdiyya and those upon Salafiyya, those doubts about Tawheed and Ibadah. So next week we'll do a summary and a response to those doubts, because the point of reading the book was to review the contents, but also then to use it to help us explain what's happening today. Because this is a book is a good opening to that. Inshallah ta'ala, whatever time is remaining, when we have any questions, we'll take it. I don't know, check. So these kinds of things about reading Quran, Ahmed rahimahullah, if it's authentic, that's the thing. If you authenticate the hadith, reading Quran after someone passes away for the dead, it's a well-known difference of opinion amongst the scholars, right? This one, and it's we covered it before, but that's a discussion regarding gifting the rewards of recitation of the Quran to a dead person, and it's not to do with shirk. It's to do with, is this something that's legislated or not? And we know the ulama differed, right? So, for example, Imam Shafi'i said it's prohibited, and those who agree with him. And then Abu Hanif and others, they said permitted, and some Hanabil as well. And some of them differed about how it's done. But this is a discussion outside this. But the first thing is that we should verify what the Imam Ahmad's views first. But also, if someone took that opinion, it's a different opinion, but it's not the stronger. The more correct view is not allowed. It's not allowed. And it's a discussion that, if you want a summary, Shaykh Salih Sindi has a small article where he summarized the issue very nicely. So he explains that. Wallahu a'lam, yes.
What is the ruling on booking to visit the grave of the Prophet ﷺ on the Nusuki app before arriving in the country?
So the booking that, when you go on the Umrah now, you have to book on the Nusuki app to go to visit the grave of Rasulullah ﷺ, specifically for the women, I think. For the men, it's just, you can still walk through. And that's not the intention of the travel. The intention is to go there, to go to the Rasulullah masjid, to pray in there, and then taba'an. So that rule is to organize the crowd. That's not why you're going to Medina, right? So your intention, where you're going, if you're just booking a flight to go to Medina to go to his grave, this is the one we're talking about. Not someone who's going there to do Umrah, maybe then come to Ziyarah of the Masjid Nabawi, and then, right, that's okay, right? But if someone's telling, no one, I don't think it's even allowed just to go to Saudi Arabia with a Ziyarah visa. I don't think that exists, right? Right? Wallahu alam, yes. So that's the thing, yeah. So that's a good point. Visiting the grave of Rasulullah excessively while in the city is not legislated. It's only when arriving and when leaving. And some say just on arrival only. And some say, Imam Malik mentioned those who in there after long duration. So there's injured because in the Shaykh Abad has a book on this about the ziyarah of Medina, but other scholars have written it too. They talk about this. Where is the asr for visiting the grave of Rasulullah? Is the practice of Sahaba like Ibn Umar. Every time Umar will come to the city of Medina after travel, he will pass by the grave of Rasulullah Abu Bakr and Umar, and then he will leave. He didn't do it again and again and again. So what happens today, some people, they're doing excessive ziyarah. So we have to caution them. See where it starts like this, ziyarah of Rasulullah, no problem. Why are you doing it so many times? And later on you notice that same person, he's selling a lot of durood, or he's making, what's really happening is that people are sending him a lot of du'as. That's really what's happening. And every time he's presenting one, he's coming back. And he's just telling you, I'm doing ziyarah. So well, we keep seeing you every day, right? So this is what's really happening. So we have to explain to people, it's upon one trip, one time. And that's why it's a very important benefit, because this is how it starts. It says it's not haram, right? But then we say, well, why you keep doing it? And that's why you have to teach the people about how to do ziyarah properly. Because this is how it starts. Not to mention some people, they are being told on their way to Umrah or to make it past by Medina to please send my dua and my salawat on Rasulullah. And we know the malaika, they carry it. Sayyahin fil ard, they travel in the earth to carry the salawat of Rasulullah to him. So the benefit is anywhere you are. And we have to explain this, because I think this is where the problem is coming. People, they don't know that, right? It's actually not as common as you think. A lot of people, they don't know that you can just send salawat of Rasulullah is going to reach. Right? Ziyarah, when you go to the masjid, and doing ziyarah is something else, but salah will reach them through that mechanism. So this is an important benefit. We don't excessively, going back to hadith, don't make the grave a place of an Eid, right? A festival. طيب, inshallah, I think we'll end with this much. Subhanakallah bihamdika ashhadu an